I'm down here at Superior Artisan Wooden Slab with Chad. We've got his Lucas mill set up with the red oak logs from my client's property where they're clearing the land to put his house. He wants some furniture made out of the log from the land, which is really cool. So there's a few issues with the log, which is normal with all trees. The nice thing of working with the sawyer is he has my cut list, and we know which pieces are long, which pieces are going to be cut into shorter pieces, so we can make sure we get the long ones out of the good sections of the log. Then the ones that are going to have a little bit of punk, we'll just do some extra, make sure I can still get plenty of good wood. He has this set up with the swing blade, so it's a large circular blade that right now is horizontal, so we can take a horizontal pass at the depth he needs, then flip it vertical and pull dimensional lumber out of the board. First thing he did was just get a flat on top that we can start working with. This probably isn't quite flat enough to get what we need, so he's down there doing his eyeball calculations and figuring out how we can start getting the cuts that we need out of this. Graph here will tell us what the kill's been doing, how it's been performing over the last hour, 24 hours, 4 days, 17, 14. See where this spikes here, when we get spikes in vacuum, that's where once a day the unit is set to release its electronic solenoid drain valve. Prior to this unit coming available on the market, vacuum drying was going to cost you a couple $100,000. And you know, for small operation guys like us, that's just kind of a tough startup. So Chad finished drying this. We picked it up a while ago. It's been in the shop for a few weeks, so it's acclimated to our shop environment. Time to start breaking this down, get the first milling on it, let it rest, mill it again. So we're gonna montage through that, and I'll talk to you again when we start doing some joinery on these things. These are the two slabs that we book matched from the center of the tree that's going to be the tabletop. Behind me, we have the two that are going to be the benches. Problem is, these are a little twisted. I went ahead and skip planed them anyway, just to get through some of that rough so I could have a better sense of what's going on. Now we have that, and it is twisted. Of course, the planer will not remove the twist, so we're going to use the CNC to flatten one side, and then we can go back to the planer. Of course, to achieve that though, we need some kind of sled, a flat surface on the bottom. So we're going to build that real quick with some steel and melamine, so that way the CNC can do its thing, and we'll tile it through there, and then it's going to be good. But first, in order to minimize how much we're trying to pass through the CNC and how much material we have to remove, because we are chasing a twist, that means opposite corners are high. What we're going to do is go ahead and straight line rip this first to you know, kind of bring that edge in where the high point is, which should save us some material loss. So after we got on the sled, I realized once it's sledded, there's no reason we couldn't just keep using the planer, which would be faster than CNC, and because my CNC isn't big enough to do this in one pass. So we just did that. Anyway, we've got a nice flat board now, but as you can see, we have a bunch of roddy sections, and on the edge has some beautiful spalting, but that tends to be a little soft and punky. So to firm this up, what I like to do is use Total Boat penetrating epoxy. It's a 2-to-1 mix, so we'll mix this up, slather it on there, and it's going to firm all that stuff up really nicely. Use this on pretty much every live edge project I do because there's almost always some soft spots that need to get some treatment. I forget exactly what the label says about how to apply this. I think you apply like a thin coat, then 24, 48 hours you apply another one, repeat as needed. What I do is the way I see it, this really punky wood's super dry, so you're gonna soak it up and draw it down. And if you let it seal, then you're not gonna get as much penetration. So as long as it's drinking it, I just keep applying it. And if I have something really punky, I'll come back the next day after that's cured and then see if it'll drink even more. Normally it really doesn't drink much more than that, but as long as it looks like it's drying out, I'll just slather more. And if it keeps going, I keep putting it on. And then once it stops absorbing, then I'm done. Penetrating epoxy is dried. It's the next day, everything's firmed up pretty nice. So now we're gonna flip this over. I got some hardboard, cut it down to be our backer. I've tried several times to use just tape and I always get leaks. I finally embraced the fact that if you're gonna do big fills like this on voids, gotta use silicone, gotta use a real backer. So that's what we're gonna do. Then we're gonna start filling all this up with some black epoxy. Also, as far as crack filling goes, I'm going to be doing a video soon on different ways to fill crack and voids because these cracks go all the way through. As you can see, this is where the pith was, and a lot of, there's still material here holding it together. But for the most part, this is all the way through. Because of that, I'm definitely going to use epoxy because it's structural and is going to bring the strength back that is missing. Whereas if I just used, sawdust and glue or CA glue or my Ragnate kit or anything else, it's not going to add the structure that the epoxy is going to. So epoxy for sure if you have to do structural repairs. It's all prepped for the pour. I'm going to be using Total Boat Thick Set to fill the structural voids and then the large voids with the structural cracks. If you're ever unsure on which epoxy to use though, I have a video coming out soon that I go through a bunch of different epoxies and the time and place to use them, why you'd want to use one over another. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're interested in that and you feel I've earned it. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and start mixing up this thick set, add some black pigment, and get all these poured. All the epoxy is done. Ended up doing 3 lifts to account for how thick these are. And the epoxy, everything's cured now, so we're ready to run them back through the planer and get them flat into final dimension. And then for the tabletop, we need to go ahead and clean up our straight line edge again with the track saw, then we can glue these together and have the tabletop. Of course, we had those big voids in the bench tops. They're filled as well. As you can see, they're different thicknesses, so we'll also run these through and bring them to the same thickness. Then we can start working on the bases for everything, but I'll tell you the plan for the bases after we get these together. All right, so the table and benches are gonna have basically same bases, just different size pieces. Ideas: foot, riser, top. This is inherently not a very strong design, so we're gonna need to use some really beefy joinery to keep this strong. So I'm going to cut a tenon on the risers and then a mortise to drop that tenon into, almost the full depth of both of these pieces, something like this to hold it together. So I did a bunch of test cuts and have my dado stack and miter gauge from Rockler all dialed in. Here's my test piece to make sure I have my dado stack at the right height and my stop block. I like using these magnetic bases for dial indicators from Harbor Freight because they just turn the knob and they stick. Pretty handy. Got everything set, so time to start cutting the tenons and mortises. Going to do a bunch of that, just different sizes for the bench and the table, and then start putting them together. The mortises I haven't decided. We might use the CNC to do the mortises just for precision and repeatability. So we'll see. So all the tenons are cut. Now to start chopping the mortises into the feet and top pieces. As you can see, I've done a lot of them. I do have one left to show you how I've been doing this. Now to get this full depth, I've been using this big honkin' 1/2 inch, 2 inch cutting depth spiral upcut to take these guys out, which has worked on all of them. However, on these feet that are 5 inches tall, I don't have the Z height. With this bit in the machine, I can't get my piece under it. So what I've been doing is I have a 1/4 inch spiral compression bit that I use to do the first pocket, and then I can sneak that one under it. There's been another issue with how to effectively secure these pieces. I've been using my cam clamps. As you can see, I have 2 stop blocks, and over here I'm using my cam clamps and a spacer, but that still has quite a bit of wiggle. Needs more security. So making sure to stay clear of where my gantry is going to slide, I just set up a ratchet strap to provide a lot of down force. Because of where the ratchet is, it actually wants to pull it over just a little bit while I'm ratcheting, so just make sure it seats down. And now this is rock solid, so I can do a small pocket with my 1/4 inch bit, swap bits, wiggle this in here, and then finish it with this, which I'll show you that. First pass finish, I'm just gonna, clean this out when I turn that thing back on, then I'll change the bit. 1/4 inch bits out, got my mortise cleaned out. Now I can put in this big honkin' dude in place because, as you can see, it's the way it's gotta go. Also, the nice thing is doing it this way, there's more bit changes because for both of these I had to change the bit, but the nice thing is I don't lose my origin. I just have to reset the 0 because obviously these bits protrude at different depths. I also had to keep in mind that when I ran the partial pass with my 1/4 inch bit, I only went 1 1/4 inches deep. The total depth is 2 3/4, so I had to make sure that I didn't set this to cut 2 3/4 inches deep because I'm Zing off of the bottom of the mortise because I don't want it to run the path through what's already been cut. So I set this to only cut 1 1/2 inches. 1 1/2 plus 1 1/4, 2 3/4. You'll also notice my little puck doesn't fit in there. No big deal. I just have to manually check my 0 or set my 0. So I'm just gonna go close and spin this and slowly step it down. Oh, there's a little line down there where the edge of the bit just started to touch. So I'm gonna call this 0. So here's one of the feet for the table. Here's the other one. I've laid out the lines to cut these angles. I tried using a angle gauge, angle thingy, taper jig on the table saw. The problem is the angle I'm cutting is more severe than this wants to go. I was able to shim it out, but I wasn't super comfortable with that. So what I tried instead was just marking the angle and then going to the bandsaw, cutting it out there. I'm much happier with that. Of course, it is a rougher cut, so I'll just hand plane these smooth. So that's gonna be the move on the remaining like 11 that I have to do. We're just gonna bandsaw them, hand plane them smooth. The other thing I was thinking is, red oak is tough to dry. This was in a kiln for 30 days, but I think it may have heated up a little too quick for how thick this was. In retrospect, we should have just had him mill it thinner. It would red a little bit faster and then done laminations. But is what it is. Problem though is this looks good, but once I cut into it, as you can see, I'm going to cut into all that checking. So I'd selected these to be the bottom because they were clean. Not a problem. These are still very strong. I'm not worried about strength. It's just aesthetics. So we're going to do some more epoxy filling on these. Just, you know, takes a little bit longer. Obviously the CNC made round corner mortises, but the table saw made square tenons. I have two options. We can square these off or round off these. I decided to round the tenons, as you can see. So I'm just using my table and a chisel. And it's pretty easy. I just establish one pretty good angle and then start knocking those corners off until it seems pretty rounded. And just lather, rinse, repeat till they're all done. All right, mixed up some 2-to-1 high performance epoxy. Got it nice and bubbly here. So we're going to use this to glue the legs together, just because with the checking I end up doing a lot of epoxy repairs on both parts, and I know the epoxy is going to bond well with the epoxy and give me a stronger bond. And epoxy tends to actually just give a stronger bond than wood glue, but there's a convenience aspect to not having to deal with 2-to-1 and mixing with epoxy over wood glue. So normally use wood glue, but I'm going to use epoxy this time. Got the legs out of clamps and finally solved the problem I've been working with. Originally, the design was to have a stretcher go in between the middle of the legs, wedged, kind of like a table I did recently. And then of course with that, I'd run some stretchers across the top as well, which would then give me a rectangle, make a nice strong base. But the clients asked me to move this stretcher up to the top. I was like, sure, no problem. I didn't think about the issue with racking, because obviously this is going to be about 3 times farther apart. And the problem is then there's not much resistance to forces like this when someone pushes on the end of the table. So instead of one stretcher in the middle, I was going to do 2 and cut them in here. But again, I still don't have a whole lot of width. I was thinking about doing a super beefy stretcher right in the middle. However, with this mortise and everything, it's super weak in the top, and because this has to carry the weight, what happened is there wouldn't be a whole lot of material left across the whole width of this, so a lot of weight on one side might actually snap this top. So that was out. The idea I came up with is I'm still going to do 2 stretchers across here just to help keep everything square, and I remembered I can weld because I have a welder, and I'm welding a giant bracket to go here, a nice heavy bracket, and I think that is going to provide the racking resistance I need. I've got one that I already welded up that needs a little bit of grinding. It's super hot, so we're gonna let it cool off, but you can see how hefty this thing is. I think this is 3/16 or 1/4 inch steel. We'll just drill a bunch of holes in here, and this will be the bracket that helps make sure that leg stays straight and does the job, and it'll also double as attachment for the tabletop to the base. Off camera, Robbie drilled holes in these super fat brackets for me while I got the stretchers cut down to length and marked out some dovetails. So the idea is our giant bracket goes here, and this is what's going to provide the resistance to keep this from happening. I made the short flange as big as I can, so that way it's not visible, and then used an even bigger plate on top to go into the table just for extra strength. So I've got the dovetails marked out. I have one stretcher set up, just started cutting one, so we're going to cut in these dovetails. Then I'll use the router to route out a dovetail pocket. After that, pretty much just put finish on this thing and it's done. And of course for the benches, we have 4 more brackets from slightly less ridiculous steel. Some of you noticed that I do have a hand tool workbench over there with some pretty nice clamps. So why do I have this thing quick clamped to my table saw? Basically, it's not set up very well to work with long stock. It can, but you know, seem to be easier to just kind of pigeon this together than drag that thing out and put a support up. That would probably actually be easier, but it's what I'm doing. The other reason I like to kind of hack things a little bit is just to remind everyone that might be watching, and including myself, that you don't always have to have the right tool for the job. That if you have the will and some basic things, you can do almost anything, I say, with my $8,000 CNC behind me, standing beside my 26-inch planer and 12-inch jointer. But as you can see, got the rest of the dovetails cut, and then the dovetail sockets, mortises, whatever, got them routed, and then cleaned up the corners with a chisel. Of course, I was a little indecisive and started knocking the corners off the dovetails, and then decided to just chisel those out. But I did make one really stupid goof over here, and when I first laid it out on the wrong side of the line. So I just made a plug and gonna glue this in there and then flush saw it. So always mark what side of a line you're supposed to work on. Always, always, always. Started cutting the dovetail pockets for the stretchers on the benches, and I don't like how low this is going. In fact, it needs to go even lower. So I stopped, and instead what I'm doing is making the dovetail on the stretcher even thinner so I can have more meat left under where the stretcher attaches on these feet, so I don't compromise the strength too much. This right here is what I'm talking about. You can see I have the thickness of the stretcher, and then the dovetail's even thinner so I can get away with a shallower pocket. Now you might be wondering, why do this and not just plain the whole board? The stretcher has two purposes here. One is to help minimize racking, which is, you know, the legs wobbling. The bracket's going to help with that a lot, and that's why I can't bring the stretchers in closer on the legs where I have more meat, because that bracket's going to take up room. The other thing is to provide some rigidity to the top. Now, the tops I have are like 1.25 inch oak, so it's pretty thick and beefy, but you know, once you might put 4 people on this, that's not hard to get up to 800 to 1,000 pounds of weight, so I want to make sure that it's plenty reinforced, and that's why these are fairly hefty. You might be thinking, okay, well, this is a weak point, so the whole board can only be as strong as this joint. And that's true, and this joint, I believe, has plenty of strength even at the 1 inch thickness instead of 1 1/4 to hold the whole weight. But what maintaining the full thickness of the stretcher does is lower my bending moment or whatever. I don't know the science words on this. But basically, if I made this whole thing thinner, when it's stretched and you put weight on it, it's gonna bend even more than it's gonna bend now. So even though the total load for joint failure is lower now than it would be if I'd done a full thickness, what I have maintained is I've lowered the failure strength of the joint, but I'm keeping the strength of the thickness of this. So when you have weight in the middle, hopefully the bench won't sag. Whereas if I had made the whole thing thinner, it would bend even more. Hope that makes sense. Finally, time to start applying some finish. I'm using Journal Finisher's Armor Seal this time, just because I really love what it does to red oak. And this red oak has some spalting, and then where the Total Boat epoxy fills are, like this is just gonna be, I mean, look at that. Now that everything's epoxied in, it actually doesn't rack too bad, but once we have, you know, a 200-pound slab on there and you're farther away, there's going to be even more leverage. And this isn't about, you know, is it going to last for a few days? Is this going to last for decades? This is going to really help take a lot of that racking pressure off. I've got some pretty super screws here that are going to go through this bracket and are just shy of coming out. So time to get these screwed in, and then the only thing left is putting the slabs on it. And of course, I think I showed you before, but we have smaller versions for the benches and shorter screws. Kind of rough. It's supposed to be soft.
Well, we gotta check it. Oh, yeah, that's not going anywhere.
That's not going anywhere.